Welcome, bienvenue. My name is Renee Ketchum, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Lecture d'été, a conversation with Elizabeth Birkelund on her new novel, A Northern Light in Provence. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French learn French, live French, and love French. And here's a great little video on all that. We have a few wonderful events coming up. I hope everybody will participate in French Cinematheque on Monday. We have Peter de Bruges, who is the head editor, film writer at Variety Magazine, joining us as a facilitator on Monday. And then we will be talking about Lafayette's bicentennial farewell tour in August. So go to afusa.org and find out about our upcoming events. A few logistics, please stay on mute during the presentation, stay on speaker view. All questions should be put in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the conversation. And if you, for any reason you have technical issues, sign back in after a couple of minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded to share on our National Alliance Française YouTube channel, and the total runtime is 1 hour. Elizabeth Birkelund is the author of 2 previous novels, The Runaway Wife and The Dressmaker. She started her career in the editorial department of European Travel and Life magazine, and then turned to freelance writing as a monthly personal finance columnist for Cosmopolitan magazine. Elizabeth has written for numerous national publications, including Glamour, Self, Working Women, and Victoria. So welcome, Elizabeth. I am actually so thrilled that we can be together today to talk about this wonderful book, A Northern Light in Provence, that I think for those of us who have read it, we are so grateful for your testament to a passionate love affair on many levels with Provence. So I have a couple of questions just to sort of set the stage for our readers and to enlighten those of us who have already read the book. What inspired A Northern Light in Provence? That's about 2 such very, very different places, Greenland and Provence.
Merci, Renée. Thank you to the Alliance Française, first off, for hosting me today. Thank you, and my book. But what inspired the novel, unlike my past books, which were inspired by characters, was the concept of translation. And I've read a lot of translated literature over the years, and I've always wondered what, if the translator is successful at conveying the meaning and the intention and the feeling and the mood of the original, of the author. So it's always intrigued me, and so I decided in order to explore the subject more carefully, I would create a character who was a translator. And Ilse Erland was ready to go. And because she's a translator, and I knew her target language would be French, because I'm a Francophile, and grâce à the Alliance Française, where I'm still taking conversation lessons, I knew that her target language would be French and that she would eventually go to France. So I decided to have her come from a place that was in such contrast to France. And why not choose a place that's 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle as a contrast? And in a way, she's not only translating words and language and poetry, but she's translating place. And that was interesting.
So you just talked about the whole process of translation. How did you begin thinking about it, and why was it so important for us to understand the process of translation? And have you done any translation yourself?
Yes, I've actually, at the Sorbonne, I took a number of translation classes, and I also did in college, and I realized how completely difficult it is to translate. it's not math, it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 2000. I mean, you're translating a culture often when you translate. And yeah, and so I've always just been intrigued. I've always been interested in linguistic origins of words. And so and why certain words are in favor and why they aren't. And so translation fits right into my love of words. And it's always been interesting to me.
Thank you. So Greenland. Greenland is not such a known culture and place to many of us. And in the book, you seem very, very familiar with it. How did you come to choose Greenland? And have you been there? Have you absorbed yourself in the culture? And what surprised you about it? What makes Greenland a character in the book? And I think we're ready for some slides.
All right, so what we're looking at is the Ilulissat Glacier. And so why Greenland was because, as I mentioned, I wanted a contrasting home for my main character, given that she's going to translate things into French. So here, compared to, the vineyards of France, is the glacier of Ilulissat, which is astounding. I mean, Greenland is so beautiful. I chose it also not only because of the contrast, but because my father's heritage is Danish, and Greenland is the autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. So, and also Rasmussen was a name that was in my father's family history, and Knud Rasmussen was a famous explorer, and he's actually the first European to cross the Northwest Passage on dog sled, and he's revered in Greenland. There's capes and glaciers and ranges named after him. So I thought and he went on so many expeditions in the far north of Greenland, untouched areas, and wrote about the ethnography and of the Inuit peoples. And so I thought, rather than go on an expedition in the northern part of Greenland, why don't I write about it through a character? And so, but there were many surprises about Greenland. First of all, so few people have been there, and that was surprising when I actually went, at how incredibly beautiful it is. I mean, and I think it's going to be the next Iceland. I do think that given these hot summers, when we were there in this picture, so I ended up going with my editor. And this picture, it was mid to late August, and the warm temperature was 41 degrees. But I wrote about, and I'll describe it a little later, but I did write my first draft without going there, just through research and talking to explorers and reading about Greenland. And then I learned a lot when I actually arrived. And most of all, the sounds were the thing that surprised me the most, because you do hear the boom of the icebergs falling into the water pretty regularly. You hear the boom, which I didn't expect. And then the other thing I didn't expect was hearing the dogs, the Greenlandic dog howling, the howls of the dogs at sunset, which is feeding time. And you realize what a culture still is intact of the dog sledding, the culture of getting around on dog sled in the winter, and in the summer they're just tied up outside the town. So the sounds were surprising, but most of all, the actual icebergs. Here you are and the hotel that we stayed in was a pretty basic hotel, but the view out the window is onto these beautiful icebergs. And I thought that icebergs kind of float by, and some of the little ones do, but the big ones are stationary most of the time. However, when you come back into the room and look out the window, they've moved. So they're so big that you don't notice that they're moving, but they are indeed moving, and they're just so beautiful. And then when the sun hits them, you go on these sightseeing iceberg sightseeing tours. And when the sunset hits an iceberg, it's just beyond belief magical. So it is, and all, of course, the whales are, you see whales every time you go out into the water. So it's a magical place. I'd go back any day. I mean, except I wouldn't go back in winter. I'd go back in August again.
Thank you. What about Provence and what about and why the Luberon? And what originally drew you to the French culture? At one point, you write about the main character. She read that people change according to the language they speak. She likes herself better in French.
Yes. So, well, yes, the French culture, and I've got some slides actually to show for the French culture. Let's see. Well, this was just to show the contrast between Ilsa, my main character, coming from Greenland and the field of icebergs, and Eja, and then going into the Luberon Valley, which is fields of vineyards and greenery and village perché. This is a shot of the coquelicot. That is one of my favorite words in French. Isn't it beautiful? Coquelicot, which comes from rooster, the comb of a rooster. That the poppies have this resemblance to the color of the comb of a rooster. But also, yeah, I've actually got a little line in my book that she felt as if she's breathing in color for the first time of her life. She's tempted to run through them, the coquelicot, lie down and share in the crimson glow of them. So she was just in such a rapture over the color, the infusion of color compared to the rock, the snow, the ice that she lived in Greenland. Even though there are certain lichen that's bright green and yellow, this is just astounding, shocking, just rapturous for her. And so to answer your question, I think the next slide, that's again the picture. Oh, that is to answer the question about what was surprising when I visited. And I had this is the residence. This is where my main character lived in a little settlement called Oquatsut. And what I had in my first draft was roads, cars, emergency vehicles in the first draft. And then when my editor and I showed up, we realized, oh my goodness, there is not one road in this settlement. It is simply grass, rocks, and people get around and dog sled in the winter, and in the summer just walking or ATVs or mostly boats. So that was one thing that I had to change in my manuscript. But let's see what the next slide has to do. And there again is there's just again the contrast of Ilsa's journey from, this is the Ilulissat Glacier, and sort of the fastest draining glacier from the ice sheet in Greenland, which is the ice sheet in Greenland is the largest ice sheet in the world. Actually, it's the second largest. Antarctica has the first. So it's the second largest ice sheet covering 80% of the country. And this is this is a picture of how the icebergs get stuck in this area because there are so many of them, and they eventually sweep through and out into the sea. But yes, so back to let's see, the next slide would be, yes, there's the Knud Rasmussen Museum, which is in Ilulissat. That's just to show. And my editor and I spent hours in that little museum. It was fascinating how he studied the Inuit peoples and their way of life and wrote about it, and all the intense adventures that he had in the north, and actually losing his friends to hypothermia and all kinds of scary things. So he's a real hero. Let's see if the next shot. Okay, so you ask about the French culture and what drew me to it. So here's a picture of my sons out in a brief stay that we had in Saint-Tropez. It's the sardines, Saint-Tropez sardine beaching. And what drew me originally to the French culture was when my family and my parents took us to the Côte d'Azur, and we rented a farmhouse. And I had never had a baguette bread that tasted so good, and butter, baguette, Fanta, which was the orange soda of the time. And then then we showed up on these topless beaches, which was eye-opening to me. And then my mother and her French friend came back one day from shopping in Saint-Tropez with purple hot pants, purple suede hot pants. And my mother never looked so happy. And then she also had a belt that was a chain leather belt. Anyway, I thought this French culture is for me. And forever after, I have been, and let's see the next slide, I've been in love with France. This is just a shot of two of my French pals, and I've had the privilege of knowing and you know these women, I think, Renee. I have the great privilege of knowing wonderful French friends who have continued to show me how to live and show me the joie de vivre, the joy of living. And this is two of them that are my models. And then the next slide, I think, will show, oh, there's another example of why I love France. And C'est Ouvert, the restaurant is open from 12 to 2. And then, the balance between work and rest and work and play is so wonderful, and such a great change for us New Yorkers and Americans, that they just know it's that savoir vivre, knowing when to stop and when to play. And restaurateurs have to eat their lunch and drink their wine and have to prepare for the next dinner. And the next slide, I think, shows, let's see. Yes, so you asked about the Luberon. And what drew me to the Luberon part of France were this massif, this range of mountains that is, there are three parts. There's the Petit Luberon, which is what we're looking at. There's the Grand Luberon, and then there's the Eastern Luberon, the Great Luberon, and the Eastern. And what is so appealing, and what was my first experience of the Luberon Mountains, was, you can turn to the next slide, was this view through the window, and showing how the mountain color changed according to the time of day. And sometimes it would be in the morning, it would be a pinkish tinge, and the next day it would be blue, or the next hour it'd be bluish or blue-gray or blue-green, and it is just that quality of light in that place that drew so many artists as well. I mean, Cézanne and Van Gogh were so successful, but not quite when you get there yourself and see it in real life. I mean, it's gorgeous. They say it's the Mistral that pushes away the haze, although this picture looks rather hazy, but that the Mistral, which is the wind coming along the Rhone, is the force that keeps the air so, I don't know, so clear and able to take in, to absorb the rays of the sunlight in a way that's unusual. And I think the next slide, let's see, is the next slide. Okay, there's another reason to love the Luberon. And Provence in general has this in July and August, you can witness this incredible profusion of purple lavender, and the smell of it is just beautiful, magnificent, fragrant, and that's just for my character, again, who just had never seen such profusion of color. And this was wonderful. And for me, the first time I saw lavender was like a life-changing experience. And let's see the next slide. If yeah, and there is the village that I based Belle Rivière on for my character Ilse. And what's interesting about, and this is the town that she falls in love with, and it's not a town, it's a village, Village Perché, perched village, and it's the reason I fell in love with Gord. which is the actual village, is that it sits up high. It's got a great view, as you can see here, of the valley. It's also got these cliffs, these limestone cliffs, into which many homes are carved and sit inside the cliff. And Ilse's first experience in this town is living in one of these cliff. It's like the troglodyte dwelling, which in the cave days they would live in because they were cool in the summer and warmer in the winter. And she actually, as did I, experience at night the shedding of the cliff on her forehead and coming down, because you're really right up against it and it does shed. But also, not only that, but you have fig trees in this little village, and you have it's just aesthetically, you have a little place that it's also in the book, called Le Cercle Républicain, which is a tobacco bar cafe. And you can't quite see it in this picture, but it's a little postage stamp of a balcony that looks out on the valley. And it's to have a cup of coffee in that spot is feeling like it's just, you're on top of the world. It's so beautiful. So let's see the next slide. Yes, I guess the next slide is.
So you speak about, we now understand this incredible place also, as the place is as much of a character as Ilse is, but the book is deeply seated in poetry, and poetry plays a really large role in this novel. Did you know you were going to write about poetry from the start, and have you yourself written any poetry, and who inspired you?
Yeah, well, I didn't know from the start that there would be a focus on poetry and that would be a theme, but I did want, as I want all of my characters to have a challenge, and for a translator to translate poetry is probably the greatest challenge for a translator, because a poet, of course, chooses every single word in a very meaningful way. So for a translator to tackle a poem and translate it and to get the same mood, the same feeling, the same meaning is really difficult. So I knew that, okay, she's going to Provence, she's going to, and not only that, not only is she going to try to translate poetry, but she's going to translate poetry with a language that is using sprinklings of the indigenous language of Provençal. So this poet is a national treasure because he's known as quintessentially Provençal. He's a descendant of the troubadour tradition of singing poetry. His ancestors were troubadours, were singers of poetry in the days of courtly love. And so I just thought this would be a great way to ground my character of the poet in the history of Provence. And Provence, what's so interesting about Provençal, the dialect in Provence, is that it was the first language that the first poetry that used the vernacular instead of Latin. So it was the first local language that wrote in the local language. The poetry was in the local language instead of the High Latin. So and also inspired, I knew I was going to have, the poet was going to be inspired by the troubadours, and then I discovered after the fact that W.S. Merwin, and whose poetry I've always loved, did translate the troubadour poetry, and he was led by Ezra Pound in his youth, when he said to Ezra Pound he wanted to be a poet, and Ezra Pound said, "Well, you don't know anything about life. You should go translate the troubadours." And he followed Pound's advice and ended up translating a lot. That's the Maze of Ventadorn, and Ventadorn was a major troubadour poet. So Merwin, he's an American, but he bought a farmhouse in the Périgord. So he had a real love of France, love of troubadours, and translator. He was a a model for my poet.
So the poet in the book is Geoffrey Labey, who is one of the last living troubadours. How does and who's referred to as Poe? What resonates about Poe for Ilse?
Yes, so Poe, Geoffrey Labey, the first time she meets him, he's an elderly poet, an elderly man, an elderly Frenchman, and he's, wearing a hat. He's very elegant. He's stylish. He is, and he's charming. And he also, what they share, what resonates more than the look of him, which is not bad at all, is that they share the love of language and they share the love of words. And she, in her past in Greenland, did not have that shared experience about words and language, and the people she was around thought that she was crazy to be a translator, and of what, a French, and how useless. And so it's the first time she's really come into contact with someone who shares her love of words. And they have so many. I had to cut a bunch of scenes of the two of them because it just went on. But they have so many scenes where they're talking about language, and they're talking about words that they love, and how the birds have play and recall, and so there's a lot that resonates with Geoffrey Labey and Ilse. Really, it's fun. It was really fun to write about those two.
Well, and I thought having read the book twice that it's also very interesting that you also note that troubadours or poets in general translate life. So you have translation in two different perspectives, which is beautiful in the book. This is a novel about love. It's about love of Provence. It's about love in so many different aspects and how it alters us. How does Ilse come to accept the importance of love in her life?
Yeah, and maybe the next slide would be fun to look at in this respect. This is just a funny thought that I had just to put this up here, because this is me in front of the Aquatsut school sign, and the Aquatsut school sign is a little schoolhouse. But I just thought that was relevant for the School of Life and the School of Love. And the original title of the book, the working title, was called Translating Love. And I wanted the character, it's so hard to translate words and so hard to translate poetry. And then you add love into the equation, and who knows how to translate love? And so she comes to accept the importance. She has the love of her brother, the love of her father, the love of her mother, well, which is very complicated, but she has some love experience. But when she goes to Provence, and you asked this question before that I didn't answer, she's in a new place and she discovers parts of herself that she didn't know before. And ultimately, what she learns in the School of Life and the School of Love is that travel and putting herself in a different place, and actually not having other people's opinions form who she felt she was, she could be free, and she could know herself better, and she could possibly make better choices for herself. And so when she is in Provence, she meets, I'm not going to give anything away, but she meets the poet, and the poet's dashing son arrives from Paris, and she has to deal with that. And so it was really fun to see how what path you take. If love comes into your path, do you move out of the way? Do you confront it? Does it move you out of the way? And it's this concept of how do you understand it? How do you translate it? How does it work in your life? And so all of these questions were part of the exploration of Ilsa and actually me through the novel. So the question being, the goal being to make the right choice for the character to make the right choice given her travel and self-discovery. Yeah.
The novel is set in small villages. What is the magic of a village for a writer and for you specifically? And what is it about? What is it about the setting that provides spark to your writing?
Yes, maybe the next slide will generate now. So this is a settlement and not yet a village, but and in the next picture, the next slide, you'll see another. Oh yeah, this is just an example of how great it is to be in a village and how I experienced Gord as a village. And this is just the beauty of a village for anyone, including my characters, and is that you can get to know the people who live and work there, and if you stay long enough. And this is a picture of a server and the wife of the restaurant owner who are in the small town of Oped in a little restaurant called Le Poliver. But and the next slide will, yeah, there's the village again. So what is the magic of a village for a writer is that um, you have, when you're building characters, you want the outside world to stir them, to challenge them, to you build your character based on who they meet and how they react to who they meet and how those people react to them. So a village is a great place for all that to happen. I mean, so much literature and fun literature is about people in their village and the people they know. So it's really about the contained environment for characters. And for me as a writer, you have the poet who's the heart of the village. He's the heart and the song and the life of the village, someone whose ancestors had been there before him, who are buried not that far away. And he is the village. Belongs to it. Whereas you have Ilsa, who is running away from her village. She's restless and sort of the rebel who does not feel like she belongs. Her career choice is scoffed at, and she by leaving her village and coming to this village, she actually sees what belonging could look like. So it gives her, so I guess the answer is you can test the concept of belonging when you have a village, and belonging is a big theme in these characters' lives.
So let's look at the structure of how you write. Do you do an outline? Do you start with a character or plot or setting or how this is I think your third book, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, what's the process?
Yeah, and maybe the next slide will portray some of that. Yeah, so here so the first thing, the process for me, and it differs all the time, is I do love, first of all, let's see, first thing I do is write notes. So I get the idea like of a translator, and then I start researching what a translator does and who are the great translators and what are their challenges and what are their loves and what are their, so I write lots and lots of notes about so in this case, it was a concept of translation, and then came the character. In my other two books, and I've written two others that aren't published yet, but the character has come first. The character has been the igniting flame for me. But this one was the concept. But and then the outline. So once I get a lot of notes and I sort of have a sense of what I want to write about, then I will write an outline, and the outline will be very vague, and the outline will allow for a lot of, it's almost like a hanger upon which to hang my plot and characters. And so, but I like to outline because I like to defy the outline. I like to have a mutiny, have my characters mutiny and go, no, we don't want to do this. We want to do something else. So it gives them something to fight against. And if I have built the characters by having them in the village and having them respond to people and knowing what is in their back pocket and knowing, if how often they do their laundry and what's in their closet, all that stuff. If I've done my homework of getting to know these, not getting to know, because you're really just building your characters, then they will actually, and it sounds sort of hocus pocus, but if you built the character well enough, that character will will inform the plot. So that's why I keep the plot part of the outline, the last part of the outline, usually the third part, open-ended, because by then, as I continue to write, then I find out what the characters are prone to do. And yeah, and so you'll see here I have notes on pétanque, which is the boule, the game that they play that the elderly poet loves to play. And then I have other notes and the beginning of an outline. And the next slide, I think, has something, right? That's where what does Ilse want? Oh, her name was Ilse Lund, and I had to change it to Erlund because Ilse Lund, then it became Ilse Lund. And Ilse Lund, did you know this, Renee, is the name of the Ingrid Bergman character in Casablanca?
Oh my God, yes. You could.
And so I saw a wonderful friend, my friend Grace Schulman, said, "Did you know that?" So we moved her name to Erlund, but at first it was Ilse Lund. And anyway, so I'll do a first chapter, and I often do the first chapter over and over and over and over again to get the right feeling. And then here I have a deep dive outline of Provence, and then more detail about greeting, looks, attitude, knows people in cafe, and then the mood. So that just gives you, and I didn't stick these things on, they just were there. So this is, what I was doing at the time. And yeah, so that's sort of how that's my process.
So my next question was about research, which you've answered pretty completely already, but did this book require a different kind of research, more research than in your other books?
Yes, actually it did. It definitely did, because I had one pile of books on translation, and that was a new field for me. I really had to get deep. There's one amazing book that I discovered. It's called the Encyclopedic Dictionary of Untranslatables. And those are words that defy an easy translation, defy any translation in the cultures. And so that book was very interesting to me. And Nabokov and Goldman, and read interviews. But so I had one pile of translating books. I had one pile of Greenland books. So I had never been to Greenland. And so that was a whole deep dive into Greenland. And then I talked to a few Greenlanders. I talked to a few explorers. I talked to travel people who'd been there, of course. And then I read some books and internet. However, nothing like the best research is going to the place. And Provence, I had a knowledge of because I'd been going to this town, Gourd, this village, since 2015, so many years, 9 years, and in a row practically, and got to know the residents. And that was that was the town known from the inside. So that was, but I also did research on the troubadours and troubadour literature, and the court of Queen Elizabeth, Eleanor of Aquitaine, And that was a whole nother realm of historical research. And yeah, those were my four big. Then I did another one on, I had another one on poetry. Um, so yeah, it definitely, I did say to myself when I was in the middle of the Greenland research, why? What about writing what you know? And that is always a challenge for me, is writing what I know. But hopefully I know the emotional life of the characters well enough to translate into different places.
So no spoilers, but and again, I just finished reading the book again. Did you know the end when you began writing the book? Because as you read this book, you're really sort of on the edge of your seat. There are a number of different things that could happen and you think are going to happen, but then might not necessarily happen. So it's would be very interesting to know if you really sort of stuck to your choice for the ending, or if it changed during the process.
Yeah, it definitely changed, and I won't give it away, but it definitely started out as a one way and ended up the other way, given the character's proclivities, given her essence, given her self-discovery along the way. So in a way, as I write, I do discover and learn about what is the right path. And sometimes the character, it's in there who they are to make perhaps the wrong decision, and then the reader can see that. But and I hope that yeah, usually hope that sometimes you intentionally have them make the wrong decision, and that's just life. But in this case, I hope she made the right decision, but I won't give it away. But I didn't know what decision she would make and where she would end up. And yeah, so.
And that in and of itself is fascinating. In reading the book, she makes her own decision. It's as if it feels as if the character decided for you how this was going to end.
And that's true. She did. She had to dig deep, and through her self-discovery in travel and meeting different people, and meeting the poet was a deep, as you said in your question, there was that resonance, and meeting the poet so grounded in who he was and his ability to express it in his poetry gave her uh, a sense of herself that she had never had before. He spoke to her as who she was, which she really hadn't experienced to a large degree. He really listened, and that was a way for her to listen to herself.
You know, I think in French we have a saying, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes il faut changer les idées, the travel that you talk about, that just sort of changes our perspective on how we're living our lives. And I know that I hear it a lot from French friends, but it does changing, changing things up a little bit, traveling, meeting new people, going to different places can really have a profound effect on the way you make decisions in your own life. But I wanted to see, we have one question in the chat, and then I had another question. So we have Ellen Lewis here, who says, thank you for this fascinating talk. Can you recommend any other villages or towns to visit besides Gordes in the Luberon or Provence in general?
Sure. There are, is it Ellen? There are
Ellen.
there are many villages, many people use Gourd as the starting point for travel around in the area. One of my favorite spots is Au Pet de la Vieux, which, have you been there, Renee and
Oh, I
Melissa?
have
I'm not.
not.
Yeah, it's this again a medieval village, perched up way high above in the closer to the Luberon than Gordes, and it has a restaurant, Le Petit Restaurant. It's called Le Petit Restaurant, and it's one of the most charming little villages, and you really feel transported. There's also Roussillon, which is known for its ochre canyons, its ochre colored canyons, and they have it's a bit, that problem with Roussillon is a little touristy, and they're known for, this is where the painters came for their mixing of their colors, because the rock is actually this orange, yellow, unbelievable that you see in real life. And then you go into the little shop and you get the little pots of the actual pigments that you mix with water. So if you're a painter, if you have kids who are, I took one home to my artist son. And then there's Ménherbe. Now, Ménherbe was made very famous by Peter Mayle uh, a year in Provence. And some of the residents are not so happy and grateful that he did that. And it's become somewhat right. A lot. I mean, in the first rule that I would say is please don't go to these places in the middle of the summer, because it is right now, not when I went in 2015, but by now, Gourd has been called the most beautiful village in France. I think that was last year, right? Or this year. And also it's called Gourd is called the most beautiful village in the world recently in town and whatever leisure, travel and leisure. So the world is in Gourd in the summer, and there are buses, and it's a little discouraging if you want to feel like the authentic. And the other thing is the marchés. If you're visiting Gourd, okay, so there's Roussillon, there is Ménherbe, there is Beaulieu. And Beaulieu, I think, is one of the more authentic little villages in the area because it's not as touristy, but they have a great marché in Beaulieu. And they're all so beautiful. The other one is La Coste. La Coste is, unfortunately, here we go again, is the Savannah SCAD, which is the acronym for the Savannah Arts School. Somehow, they have a lot of the property. They've bought a lot of the property in La Coste, but still, it's worth a visit because they've renovated it and it's beautiful. I mean, you go up to the top on the cobblestone streets, and there are two cafes that are worth going to there, and one overlooks the beautiful valley, and you can see Beaulieu across the way. And this is where the towns, actually, the villages at one point in the medieval days actually did have terrible battles against each other, and they'd look at each other. And so there was a lot of rivalry between these villages, and then but then there are the more unknown, for example, Apt is not some place where most people would go, but for the day of the marché, it's a huge marché and it's a wonderful marché, and it's actually where people actually live. So what's happened, to continue the story of Les Beaux Villages, which seems like such a nice thing to do for your village, is that what's happened is people have come and bought in secondary residences in these places, and they're not staying through the winter, so that the boulangerie, the bakery, the butcher, and all the little shops cannot sustain their the customers, their cost of living throughout all the months. They come only in the summer for a certain amount of time. So it's really changed the nature of these villages. The worry is that they'll all become like little museums of where people used to live. And that's the part that is not so great about all the tourists. But if you go in April, May, early June, or September, October, any other month, just avoid July and August. And unfortunately, that's when the lavender is out. So you might miss the lavender, but they're awfully great photographs of the lavender. And I hope that answers the question of the little villages, if I've forgotten any there. But if you're right there, if you're in Gourd, you'll be right in the center of all the beautiful little villages.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I know Ellen, and I'm sure she's taken copious notes because she travels extensively. We have another question from another Greenwich friend, Cindy Smith. Hi, and thank you. I have one ditty question. She says, is the history of the 3-day-old baguette for making the circle in pétanque and using a cork for the cochonnet true? Just curious.
That's a good reader Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. That's a great reader. Yes, it is. I did research on pétanque and boule. And yes, they do use the 3-day-old baguette as a place to stand, as to draw the circle from which they throw their boule. So that is the case. At least it's the case with the elderly people in the town. Now, the younger people might be doing something else. And in the past, it was mostly a male sport, but now it really is female male. And if you're in Paris in the Jardin de Luxembourg, you see women and men playing, and it's very serious still. And the other thing is the cork. Yes, it depends. Again, some people use a bright green ball as the target, but back in the day, which would be so natural to use a cork. But the cork does, if you've got the Mistral going, the cork really can fly. So that could be for you or against you. But the answer is yes, it is the case that is used, not by everyone, but it is.
Great question. So I don't see any other questions in the chat, but as we come to a close, I wanted to ask you just one other question. This book is very contemporary in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the things that really interested me in your writing is how you address climate change, and how what it led me to start to do a little bit of reading on what's going on in Greenland. You also slip in a little bit of AI into one of your main characters, so that the story that's about poetry and about love is also incredibly contemporary and very relevant to where we're living right now. But I'd love, in the next few minutes, I'd love to hear a little bit about Greenland. I think we're all terrified of AI and we don't know enough about it, but the climate change issue in Greenland is very serious.
Yeah, and as I was saying, when you're there and you hear the boom, which used to be exciting for people, it's not exciting. It's like the boom of doom, because it is, every time you hear that boom, it means that there's an iceberg calving, and calving is the word for breaking off. The iceberg is breaking off from the glacier, melting, sliding, and dumping into the water, making the sea level just that much higher. And one of the statistics is that in this Ilulissat Glacier, where my editor and I stood for a while and for an afternoon just watching it, is that 35 billion, if you can get your head around that, tons of icebergs calve into the sea every year. And it's this particular glacier is the fastest. It has the has the velocity that is causing 4% of the ice sheet of Greenland to drain into the water. And so that's just a portion of, I mean, it is so scary. It is it's one of the fastest draining glaciers in the world. So you're experiencing it right there firsthand, and you're seeing these enormous icebergs floating by, and there they are going into the water and increasing our global sea rising enormously. I mean, there are, I guess it said, I've got one statistic. Acceleration began in 1997. Summer speeds up to 4 times its speed. This summer, it speeds up to 4 times its speed than it was in the 90s. Yeah, it's just, it's responsible for 4% of the increase in global sea level in the 20th century. So it's happening. If you go, I think everyone should go to Greenland, because number one, it's so beautiful, but number two, you experience the sea level, and you experience the glaciers and the icebergs and the melting right firsthand, and it's daunting. It's absolutely terrifying, actually. And you'll see in the book, if you read it, and that there is an experience that the main character has that is part of that experience, that one day I don't know if we will face it, but our generations will face. She has an experience that involves that kind of draining of icebergs into the sea. So I hope that answers the question. I really recommend, even more than Provence. I think the deal is you should go to Greenland in the summer, where it's 41 degrees and cool and beautiful, and then Provence in the fall, late fall. That's my recommendation.
Well,
Greenland
given
also,
this weather, I think we're all ready to go to Greenland.
Iceland, I think it's the new Iceland. Iceland for me, and I haven't spent much time there, but I thought Greenland was a million times more beautiful. But don't tell the Icelandic people that, but I really did. It was stunning.
Well, Elizabeth, we're coming to an end. And Melissa, do you have the final slide of where people can access this book? If anybody here is I see some Greenwich names, please go to Diane's Books if you're in Greenwich and buy the book. Otherwise, bookshop.org or your local bookstore. And I wanted to thank Elizabeth so much for joining us today. This is a wonderful book. I read it a couple of times. It's a wonderful story. And again, thank you for joining us. And I hope everybody who's read the book has enjoyed it. And I hope the others will hop to their local bookstore and buy it soon. So thank you so much. And we look forward. Yeah, I heard you say that you have 2 other books that have not yet been published. So we look forward to the next.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much to the Alliance Française. Je vous adore.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Bonne soirée.